evening, everybody. I'm David Colburn with the Bob Graham Center. We're delighted to have you here this evening. We're co-sponsoring tonight's event with the Division of Sponsored Research led by Joe Kays, who edits Explore magazine. I hope you read Explore. I hope you get it and read it. Joe says there are copies in the back. Joe is one of the undervalued people at the University of Florida who does an extraordinary job making the research of the faculty comprehensive to the public. Thank you, Joe, for all you do. And tonight's speaker is Doug Jones. I'd like to say that I hired Doug Jones when I was provost, but unfortunately he was there before me. But I always claim credit for him, believe me, because he's such an extraordinary person, administrative leader, scholar, and really somebody who's visionary in terms of thinking about the future of the museum. You probably know our museum is ranked second in the United States among university museums of natural history. Have I got that right, Doug?
Pretty close.
I mean, you lied to me about that. I know that a couple of times. I believed you. Doug we're grateful to have him here this evening and share with us the many things that our museum does, because it's the 100th anniversary of the Museum of Natural History. What a great day and great time for the University of Florida. It's one of, I think, our great public entities. You know, there are a number of things that go on around this campus, but they're largely confined to faculty and students. The Museum of Natural History reaches out way beyond the University of Florida's reach in many respects to the nation. So with that small introduction, I ask you to join me in welcoming Doug Jones this evening.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming here tonight. It's a privilege to talk to you and tell you something about an institution that means a great deal to me, and hopefully to you as well. So as you can see from the slide, the Florida Museum of Natural History is celebrating its 100th anniversary as the state museum, 1917 to 2017. The museum actually predates 1917. The museum was founded, the oldest references that we can find to the origin of the museum go back to 1891 in Lake City. The museum was part of Florida Agricultural College in Lake City. And it came to Gainesville in 1906 when the Florida Agricultural College, along with several other institutions, were brought together in Gainesville to form what would then become the University of Florida. And the first home to the museum, as you can see in the slide, is Thomas Hall, which is now a dormitory. That was a relatively modest museum, but we're told that the citizens of Lake City didn't want to see it go. And in fact, when the wagons, horse-drawn wagons, were loaded up, every wagon driver was outfitted with a shotgun because they expected that there could be some trouble. The Lake City populace wanted to hold on to their museum. Nevertheless, it's been here for a long time, first in Thomas Hall, and then second in Science Hall, which now we know as Keene Flint, over on University Avenue. And it was in Science Hall for quite some time. These are what the displays look like. Looks like a 19th or 20th century museum, doesn't it? Everything is safely under glass. You can see it, you can leave, and you can be unaffected by what happened at that museum. So a true cabinet of curiosities. The university realized that the museum was growing by leaps and bounds, and in 1914 hired the first director of the museum, Thompson Van Heining, known for his great sense of humor. joke. He's one of the sternest individuals I think I've ever seen in a picture. There are no recorded photographs of him with a smile. But he came from the University of Iowa, the Iowa State Museum, where he was director, and he was totally blown away when he arrived in Florida. Why? Because he realized, as this quote indicates, that the biodiversity in Florida was so much greater than it was in Iowa. Species of birds, species of plants, trees, everything around us was so robust and so numerous, he thought that truly the potential was here to form one of the great museums of the world. And so we've been living under that burden ever since, trying to make one of the great museums of the world here in Gainesville, Florida. Which they seem to do maybe a little better in Paris and Washington and London, but nevertheless, we can hold our own with them. So to get the message out back in the day, the Florida State Museum took museum objects outside of Gainesville and traveled them around the countryside in vehicles that looked like this, and so they did outreach even back in the day. Well, the museum soon outgrew the confines of Science Hall and then moved downtown to the Siegel Building, which still exists in downtown Gainesville. It used to be our big skyscraper, still is, I guess, although maybe the Standard or some other recent building is taller. I'm not sure about that, but the museum existed for about 30 years down in the Siegel Building downtown. And their exhibits look not too different than what they look like in Science Hall. Cabinets of curiosities, but the collections were growing. And when Van Heining came to Gainesville, there were about 50,000 specimens in the research collections. They continued to grow. Here's one of the exhibit components in the Siegel Building. Well, then in 1970, when J.C. Dickinson was the director of the museum, the Florida State Museum, as it was known back then, moved back onto the UF campus. And Dickinson Hall still remains one of the main buildings of the Florida Museum here on the UF campus. So that is home now to most of the scientists, the researchers, and the scientific collections. In fact, my office is just down the hill in Dickinson Hall. But in the late 1990s, realizing that yellow school buses could no longer make it onto the University of Florida campus without probably running over a number of students or cyclists and so forth. If visitors wanted to come in off the interstate, there was no place for them to park their car. Attendance had really started to lag. And that was okay with a lot of the staff at that time, because those darn visitors, they soiled the carpet, they put their fingerprints all over the glass cases, and we didn't get any more money, whether 10,000 people came or 10 people came. The budget was the same year after year. So why did we need all those people to come visit the museum? Well, that philosophy is a shortcut to nowhere, and so luckily cooler heads prevailed and more visionary people came to rally the university administration to create the picture that we saw at the beginning of the slideshow, and Powell Hall was created over on the western edge of campus, and that indeed is where the public thinks of the museum as being located these days. And here's an interior shot of Powell Hall, open every day but 3 throughout the year. And the exhibits are, of course, now we're in color. We used to only exist in black and white years ago, so it's a lot more interesting right out of the gate. And the exhibits, you'll notice, have taken a real turn. Whereas the exhibits before were fairly static, you looked at them and you walked away. Now they become much more experiential, and we seek to put visitors into certain environments, like the Florida Cave, where they can experience cave features and then see some genuine artifacts in there as well. Or they can go underwater in the Hall of South Florida and have close-up encounters with some of the creatures that that they would see in a mangrove environment or shallow marine environment in South Florida. And these are permanent exhibitions, but they stay very vibrant for our audiences. The most recent gallery that we have built, it opened in fact just last month, is the Discovery Zone. The Discovery Zone is designed for the youngest members of our community, 10 and younger. And we realized that this was an audience that we had not paid enough attention to over the years, but we soon realized that this was going to be extremely, extremely popular. And so the Discovery Zone opened in the middle of July. It saw 20,000 visitors in the first 2 weeks. So it gives you an idea of how popular it's been. We take it as a special challenge to inspire and excite the learning process about natural Florida in the youngest members of our community. So that's been a real joy. It's a public-private partnership. Very loyal donors supplied about 50% of the funds, and then the university kicked in some, and we applied for 2 big state grants and got those, and it all came together. Very satisfying. So in addition to our permanent exhibits, which are free, the museum is free to the public, we do have 2 ticketed experiences. Most noteworthy among these are the butterfly rainforest, where we fly about 2,000 butterflies of 60 to 80 species every day. And then we also have traveling exhibits which we bring in from around the country here to Gainesville so that our community doesn't necessarily have to travel to Atlanta, Chicago, or Los Angeles, New York to see some of these traveling exhibits, like T-Rex named Sue, one of my favorites, Chocolate. The current exhibit is Frogs, A Chorus of Colors. If you haven't seen it, you better get over there because it's leaving the day after Labor Day. A lot of really, really cool frogs. And you don't have to touch them or do anything to them except enjoy them. So I would encourage you to do that. We also create exhibits from time to time, and those are based on the research that's done by some of our professors. This is one called Titanoboa, largest snake that ever lived. This is a reconstruction of what that snake would have looked like in life. It's an unfortunate mock-up of this snake because they have it eating an alligator, which didn't play too well in Gainesville, but you know, they loved it in Tallahassee for some reason. I'm not sure. But that's a really big snake, and this snake, of course, is extinct now. But just to give you an idea, there's the largest recorded living snake that all these gentlemen are holding on to. You can see a vertebra from a 20-foot anaconda, and there's a comparable vertebra from Titanoboa. So that snake was close to 50 feet long and would have had trouble going through a typical door. So it was truly a spectacular creature in its day. Another example of an exhibit that we built was First Colony, our Spanish origins, the story of St. Augustine. And here are some pictures of what that exhibit looks like. That exhibit exists now over in Government House in St. Augustine. So if you want to go visit it and learn more about St. Augustine and its origins, please do. But that was based on the work of Kathy Deegan and her students over many years of archaeological excavations at largely the Fountain of Youth Park, which is about a mile north of city center. And this was the place where Pedro Menendez Davilas first colonized St. Augustine and lived for the first year. And so Kathy and her students discovered this site and have brought it to life in that exhibition. We also have a number of special programs from time to time. We value collecting, but we do have crazy people in Gainesville, and we try to be very open and embracing of all types of collections. This is the spatula lady. I hope she's not here. So people ask me, well, how many people come to your museum? You're located in Gainesville. You're not in Tampa or Orlando or Miami. Last year our visitation was 208,776. So a fair amount of people, considering the size of our community, come to the museum, and we're very pleased. Every fourth grader in Alachua County comes for free. We supply the money for the buses to bring them here. UF students can attend for free because of UF student government, and we had more than 15,000 UF students come to the museum last year, about a third, almost a third of our student body. And since Powell Hall opened to the public in 1997, we've had 3.5 million visitors come to Powell Hall. As David mentioned, we're very proud of the rankings of the Florida Museum. Here's 50 most amazing college museums. Number 1 is the Harvard University's Museum of Natural History. Number 2 is the Yale University Peabody Museum. Numbers 3, 4, and 5 are art museums. I'm not going to show you pictures of them, but there's number 6. And so we're actually, David was right, we ranked within the top 3 of university-associated natural history museums in the country. And if you really tease apart the numbers, we really do a whole lot better than Harvard and Yale in terms of grant activity, total publications, and many other metrics whereby you could measure productivity or success. I'm not going to say that we're better than they are, but in most objective measurements, we exceed their totals. So I'll just leave it at that. And we're all accredited. I think Harvard's accredited. But anyway, so next I want to shift gears. I've talked mostly about the public side of the museum, and I want to talk about the other side of the museum. I like to think about it, the museum as an iceberg, as a metaphor. When you're on a ship, you see that little part of the iceberg that sticks above the water. When you go into a natural history museum or an art museum, that's really what you see. You see the pieces that are on the wall, or you see the specimens that are displayed there. But supporting those specimens that you see and the interpretation around them is a great body of research and collection, the sort of 90% plus or minus that exists below the waves. And that's the same thing in our museum too. So the visitors see about a small proportion of the total scientific collections that the museum holds on to. And as I mentioned to you before, many, if not most of those, are located in Dickinson Hall, just down the hill from us here. Dickinson Hall has been around, as we saw, since 1970, has its issues, and one of those issues is shown here by Dr. Page, our curator of fishes. We have tens of thousands of gallons of alcohol in that building. We're really happy that we have all those specimens and alcohol. The State Fire Marshal does not share our enthusiasm, however. And so we're approaching a crisis situation. We almost were yellow taped off and said we couldn't go into the building anymore because we have so much alcohol and the building can never be brought up to code. So it's a real challenge for us. In addition to the specimens and alcohol, one of the newer frontiers is cryogenic specimens, frozen tissues that are used in DNA work. That's one of the big futures for collections, and again, we have issues there. So we really would love to have a special collection facility that was purpose-built for the state's collections. Our collections are big, as I mentioned before. They represent a library of life, just as libraries represent the accumulated knowledge of human beings and what they have created. Collections of biological nature represent a library of life on Earth. Those wet collections, you can still get DNA out of those specimens, and you can do all sorts of wonderful scientific experiments with the material that's housed in biological collections. And as specimens, or species rather, disappear from the face of the Earth, the value of the DNA that's in those specimens skyrockets for many reasons. Our collections are very big. Here are some totals that I put together from the web a couple years ago. The largest column over on the left is the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History. And then there is the Natural History Museum in London, and then there's the Musée d'Histoire Naturelle in Paris, and then the orange bar is the Florida Museum of Natural History. Who knew, right? But the collections here are very large, and they're very, very important scientifically. So we have a tremendous scientific resource that has been used in many, many important contexts. Here's one of our investigators, Akito Kawahara, who works on the Tree of Life, along with our newest entries into the National Academy, Doug and Pam Soltis, working on the Tree of Life as well, the representation that indicates how species, all the described species, approximately 2 million, are related to one another, the family tree of life on Earth. And these people are doing it with their work on the genetic code and molecular evolution of species. So really, really important scientific resources. Our collections years ago were important in helping to ban DDT when the bird eggs that were in those collections were used to refer to the thickness of eggshells in more modern birds living during the era of DDT, and you could actually show, because we had those ones that were collected 50 and 100 years ago, that the bird eggs of these raptors had thinned over time, directly related to DDT. In more recent times, you'll remember the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. How do we know that the seafloor has been impacted by oil spill? How do we know that the oil has had deleterious effects on the benthic community? Well, if you don't know what lived there before and how much of it there was, you don't know what's disappeared. You have to have a before to gauge the impact of an after. And so that's what Dr. Paul A. and his team have been doing for a long time in different parts of the Gulf. And so they've been able to say, yes, this area of the seafloor used to be populated by these organisms in this amount, and guess what? Now they're not there. Or this area has been unaffected, and we can tell that because there's been no population change. So some of the importance of having these collections. At the middle of the summer and Shark Week, you will have seen this guy on various channels around the nation. Thankfully, he's not in Sharknado 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. But in a more serious vein, George Burgess has overseen our International Shark Attack File, which is a compilation worldwide of any time a shark bites a human being. And that database is kept right here at the University of Florida's Museum of Natural History. Here's Delano Lewis from Jamaica. Got his Ph.D. here, worked on pesticides that were natural in origin, not involved, not made in a laboratory from synthetic chemicals that were useful in preventing these swallowtails, their larvae, from feeding on citrus. Really, really important work done at the museum. So here's a synopsis of what our collections and research activities have been like for the preceding year. More than 1,000 visitors to the collection. You can see the number of loans, 384 almost 1,000 specimens that have been cataloged. Many, 60 new grants worth more than $8 million. 195 species new to science were described by the curators at the museum. As I mentioned before, our faculty at UF continue to earn honors that we can all be proud of. So I like the way this graph is headed. There have been some ups and down years, and this is one for Joe Kays to appreciate in the VP for Research's office, but our grant and contract activity is more and more important year after year. It plays a bigger part in our budget. Our professional publications, this last year, 16-17, I've gone over 200. These are scientific and technical publications, contributions to new knowledge that the faculty and some staff and graduate students have discovered or created. So a real research engine, like many parts of the university. People say, how big is your staff and what do they do? We employ more than 320 full and part-time people at the museum. They teach courses in allied departments, most notably the biology department, our neighbors with whom we collaborate closely and often. Faculty in the museum chair graduate student courses. You can see how many of those. They serve on other committees and so forth. So involved in the fabric of academic life. Not a museum that's out on the fringe doing something unrelated to what's important to UF, but a museum that is integrated into the fabric of this academic community, but as Dr. Colburn said, also not afraid to invite the public in and say, in addition to all the things we do here, come on in, public, come on in, community, and see what we do, and see the great work that happens at the University of Florida, not just by museum scientists, but by all scientists involved in biological things. What does our budget look like? Well, as museum director, I probably spend too much time worrying about this topic, but it's kind of interesting. So I've been at this for a long time, I'm embarrassed to say, but when I began as museum director, the state paid for 80% of our budget. And that was about 20 years ago. And the state now pays about 38% of our budget. Mind you, I appreciate that, and the state has done a great job. They've been very stable, and you actually see those orange bars increasing slightly. But what we've been able to do through grants and contracts, through fundraisings, through earned income, facility rentals, and ticketed events, is grow our budget so that we can take the money that the state gives us and increase it by our own activities to create a sum that is so much larger that gives us the ability to do more things. And so we appreciate what the state gives us, we build on it, and we return on that investment. So I'm very proud of the way that graph looks too. Should probably retire before something happens. Okay, so you know, it's my job to say a lot of good things happen at the museum, and a lot of good things happen, but we do have our challenges. And these challenges are the issues that we face as a museum. So we're 100 years old as the State Museum. We could rest on our laurels. That would be another disaster if we decided to do that. We have to look at where Florida is headed and how we can have an impact on the future. And that's where our museum is focused, laser focused. So what are the challenges that we face? Here's one of the challenges that we face. It doesn't get talked about so much. In the late 60s, there was this book by Bob Ehrlich, The Population Bomb, but you know, doesn't get talked about so much. So this is a graph that looks at the growth of an enormously successful species, Homo sapiens. And if you've ever taken a biology course, especially population biology, and you see a graph that looks like that, you say, wow, that's an R-selected species if I've ever seen one. You know, that must be something with exponential growth. And you look at the 10,000, 12,000 years of time on the bottom, and all of a sudden that curve just takes off exponentially. And we're at about 7.5 billion people on Earth now, and probably, they say, headed to more than 9 billion by 2050, that little red line up on the top. And, you know, where does it end? Humans are not R-selected species. Biologists years ago, ecologists were telling us that the carrying capacity on Earth was probably about a billion or 1.5 billion people. And we've way overshot that. So what is the Earth going to look like? I mean, you can't do much about human population like you can manipulate other species. It's a tough subject to talk about, but it's really, really important. And it's really important in Florida, too, because Florida's population is increasing really rapidly. Unbridled growth, even though it brings an economic benefit with it, is not a long-term solution. You heard me say it. I'll be gone, my kids will have to deal with it, but it's not going to get you where you want to be in the long run. And so Florida's population, we go from 1 million at the beginning of the early 1900s to now more than 20, we're about 21 million people in this state. And along with that population growth, lots of not so great things happen. And the rate of extinction is one of those. And I want to see if I can activate this video, but it's maybe, is Kevin here? I don't see it. All right. Normally I would just click on this and it would activate. But if it doesn't, it's not the end of the world. I can sing for 2 minutes instead. That's all right. I'll just warm up my voice. So, everybody, somebody, sometime. Oh, no? Just go to the Florida Museum website. Yeah. Perfect. Let's just scroll up. And yep. Just move the whole. Yeah. Yep. I'm back, Dave. See.
Being a junior explorer in a big world was pretty exciting.
I think I've always just loved being outside and loved being in nature.
And when I got a little older, I really got into rocks and minerals and fossils.
The research that museums can accomplish provide us with baseline biodiversity data.
Biodiversity is this complex issue. There's no simple answer, there's no simple solution.
We're losing natural areas at an unprecedented rate.
The disappearance of biological diversity has been to create a sixth mass extinction.
I would like to hope that we are getting smarter about our actions. We're putting more value on what is being lost.
I think a lot of that can come through science, and the science that we do here at the museum is fundamental to facing these challenges.
It's not just science for science sake, it's science to help us create a better world to live.
We care for about 40 million specimens and objects.
Being able to digitize the specimens and data associated with them is a massive movement forward.
We can really inform people as to, what the future looks like.
It's not only the objects and the data, but it's the ideas and the inspiration that each one of those objects or artifacts allows.
And if we start to aggregate across geography, across time, we can assess change in ways we were never able to before. These collections that sit in these rooms and are cared for are breathing new life into what museums bring to society.
The next 40 or 50 years may be the most crucial window in human history. What we can do here, if we can get the public engaged and feel like we are all in this together.
Understand that the world around us is really complex, exciting, and really worth fighting for.
All right, now I just need to get back to my show here. All right, perfect. So we move on and we say, what about this biodiversity and these extinctions? Well, you all know the saga of the Florida panther. Every time a panther dies, in his necropsy. We house the skins and bones of those panthers that have been useful in toxicology studies, environmental health studies, and our mammalogists have been really involved in panther work. The Miami blue butterfly, a different kind of creature altogether, was actually thought to be extinct for many years until a small remaining population was found on Key Largo. Jared Daniels and his team probably were 30 individuals of this species left on Earth, and through captive propagation they've released more than 16,000 back into the natural environment of South Florida. The Miami blue is not the only conservation target among the butterflies. There are many that our team of lepidopterists are working on across the country. Working with the Disney Conservation Fund, it's been a great supporter. And we look for support in all different places, including right here in Gainesville. The Shaw's butterfly was one that was also thought to be extinct and has been brought back by captive propagation, so we've partnered with our friends over at First Magnitude Brewing, and this was Shaw's Scout, which was brewed a year ago. This last year we have the Miami Blue Bach, and we have another beer that's coming out pretty soon. Watch the newspapers. I won't tell you about that, but it's been a great partnership, and it's brought the plight of these butterflies to a segment of the audience that we don't typically get in the museum all the time, and so it's been really, really wonderful. And our friends there give us a little bit of revenue from the sale of each of these, so it's really quite remarkable. We also work on endangered species in the ocean. This is the small-toothed sawfish, which George Burgess and our ichthyology team helped to get federally listed, the first endangered marine fish. This species would have been extinct. It used to range from Texas all the way around the Gulf, all around Florida, up the East Coast, and all the way to Long Island Sound. This is where it lives today, and it's going to survive because people care about it, and because they are monitoring the populations, and they've set in place rules and regulations that fishermen are happy to comply with, and so this species is on the rebound. Our folks work with people from Homeland Security and the U.S. Department of Agriculture to look at invasive species and a lot of parasites and pests that come in to our country, and especially here in Florida. Florida seems to be ground zero for so many issues that face our country. When we talk about invasive species, this is one that we all know about, the Burmese python. Here are two really large ones that were skinned out. One of those, Representative Creedle, a couple of years ago, came to see and said, why do we have this python problem? Well, this female, when it was dissected, had more than 80 eggs in it. And so he said, oh, now I see why. That's probably a species we're not going to get rid of, but nevertheless, we are working on understanding the biology of that species even more too. And then we also have moved into another realm. We tended to shy away in the past from some of the issues that face our state and our nation. Climate change is one of those, and so I had a chance to talk to some museum directors at the Florida Association of Museum Conference in Pensacola last year. There's a lot of evidence for climate change and human impact on that. My wife said, well, if anybody really doubts, just show them this slide. That should convince everybody that things are getting warmer out there. So, I don't know about that. It looks like fake news to me. But anyway, I think if you have the kind of results that come from Mauna Loa, and you see the CO2, and you look at our coastlines, and you look at what happens in Miami and in Tampa and so forth, there's not much doubt. And so we talk about these in our museum. Over on the far wall there, you see we had some panels that talked about climate change, past and present, showing what the broad range of climate change over time has been, and then looked at sea level rise and what we can do about sea level rise, and we've asked people for their input. And that brings us to one of the most exciting initiatives that the museum is in right now. The National Science Foundation has said that digitizing collections, making the data and the images in collection available in digital format is a high priority for this nation. And they've committed $100 million over 10 years to do that. Well, $25 million of that is coming to the University of Florida, to the Museum of Natural History. We are the national hub for this effort. And so we are the organizing unit that is helping to digitize collections around the world, around the country rather, and make them talk to one another. Why digitize? Because there are billions of specimens in collections that we need that critical information available in a form in which we can use it for scientific investigation without having to go and visit each one of those museums and hold that specimen in your hand. If we had that available digitally on your computer, in your office, you could work with those data and speed the progress of science even faster. And why does that matter? How does it relate to climate change? There's two examples from Cam Soltis's work. So you can see these are two different kinds of plants, a flat spiked sedge and the scrub palm. You can see what their distributions look like now, and you can also model what conditions are going to look like in 2050 with warming continuing as it is. And you can see what the distributions of those plants will look like, those species of plants will look like in 2050. Some will really be reduced, but others will actually expand in terms of their range. Well, if you were a nurseryman or you were a county government agent who was interested in restoring state lands or county lands to their natural habitat, which ones would you want to plant? It's really important with a long view out toward the future of predicting what's going to be able to live where. And business as usual is not going to get it done. And so digitizing data and working it into climate models has tremendous predictive value, and we've just begun to tap into that now. And it's an exciting prospect for the future. And then I'm going to finish with a last example, our Florida Springs. So we were fortunate a few years ago to host an exhibit of the photography of John Moran as he took pictures of our endangered springs. And it was called Florida's Springs Eternal, Florida's Fragile Fountains of Youth. And so we hosted the opening of that exhibit, and then it traveled around, and the exhibit has very compelling images of what's happening to some of our springs. And you can see this, and you probably, looking around the audience, you've probably seen it firsthand. Had to show a picture of Governor Graham and his family here, along with John Moran and Bob Knight and others who were instrumental in making this happen. And so we had exhibits that traveled around, we had programs for teachers, we had bus wraps, made it all the way to Tallahassee, and the good news is that our legislators listen. And so there's a lot of money going into this saving of our springs right now, which is an investment in the future and in keeping some things that are so special in Florida special for future generations. And so I think that even though we're a museum where people look at things that are sometimes in glass cases, we have a real role to play going forward that can really change how people think about the environment and the state in which they live. So I'm very proud of caring for 40 million specimens. I'm proud that we're ranked among the top 3 university natural history museums. We have the #1 Lepidoptera Center in the world. We employ a lot of people. We contribute economically to this university and to this part of the state. We're a national leader in the digitization effort of the National Science Foundation. And a study that we commissioned with David Denslow and his group over in the College of Business determined that every year we contribute $74 million. We have a $74 million annual economic impact on Florida. We get, remember, $10 million from the state legislature. We raise a bunch of our own, and we contribute 74 back. So we're an economic engine. Even though we're a museum, even though we ask you to be a member, come to our gala, you know, bring your kids, buy a ticket. We do that a lot, but we return a lot too. And I think that the return on investment speaks for itself. I'm proud of that. So my last slide is our tagline, our vision, if you will. We want to inspire people to care about life on Earth. And if I could add a little bit and make a positive difference in its future. And that's the future of the Florida Museum of Natural History for the next 100 years. Thank you.
You know, we usually ask you to come to the microphone to ask your questions. So if anyone has any questions, please come forward. Who's going to be first? It's a small group.
Yes, Doug. Just an academic question. I know you'll be shocked, but I don't know if you're familiar with or heard about the book Agnotology, Study of Ignorance, because there's a chapter in there that actually addresses where climate change denialism actually came from. That actually evolved out of Reagan's Star Wars program, and a couple of physicists were unhappy with the results of that program. Not supported by the peers. I don't know, and the George Marshall Institute. Have you studied that kind of?
No, I thought you were going to say, where does ignorance come? And they had my picture in there in the beginning of that chapter. You were scaring me there. No, I haven't. I'm not a student of that.
But I'm just thinking for your activism, part of the interest you may take a look at that because the fact is to know where it came from helps you better understand where these people are heading from.
Sure.
You know, and the role that the complex role of how it also involved with the cigarette companies too, and being merchants of doubt. It was tied in actually. Climate change denial was a product of that too.
Interesting. All right, I'll have to get the reference.
Okay, thank you.
Interesting.
Very good talk there. You know, you pointed out the enormous increase in the human population. Another trend that's happening at the same time is urbanization. People are crowding into fewer and fewer places. And the net effect of that is that most people spend most of their lives, maybe from birth to death, far from the natural world. And one, that cheats them of something that's really important, I think, in part of maintaining our psychic health and a sense of wonder about the world. And also, people don't realize from their own experience how the world is changing because they don't have any baseline to compare it against. People talk about the shifting baseline, for instance, and there was a great study done by a student, I think here at the university, of fish boats at Key West. And what they did, you know, when somebody gets a fish in Key West, they always hold it up. And so they went, and the companies there keep copies. So they went back to like 1900, and people were holding up absolutely enormous fish.
Yeah.
And as time went on, so like the
Small.
underwear you
Yeah.
showed, you know, gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So they're holding up these little minnows practically to the camera. So museums play a particularly important
Yeah.
role
Oh.
in facilitating that reconnection with nature.
You're absolutely right, Bob. And it's funny you should mention that. I was just talking to Bruce McFadden, who you also know, about the effect of urbanization. And it's ironic that as we preserve more lands, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing to do, fewer people are comfortable going out there and enjoying and making use of those wild lands because we're an increasingly urbanized society. And people come to the museum and look at butterflies and plants and animals that you and I would have seen by hiking through the woods and making tree forts and stuff, and they just don't have that experience. And so it makes a very different role for us, you know, going forward. We have to reach them, you know, digitally through this, and hope we get them linked in so that they'll come and see the real thing and pique their curiosity enough to maybe make them go out into the natural world and then make an investment in that. So that's a really good point.
Hello. Sorry. I first want to say thank you for all the wonderful work you've done in the museum. I've been coming here since I was 9 years question was, you're talking about the traveling exhibits that come in. What is kind of the behind the scenes process for bringing in these exhibits that can be able to be considered?
Yeah, no, it's a real question. We have a committee that is made up of museum faculty and staff, but we have some board members here tonight, and we often solicit opinions from our board members who travel around to some of the major, say, what have you seen? What do you think would play well here? Of course, it's an industry too, so we get bombarded all the time by flyers, or we go to the National Museum Convention, and there's a great exhibition hall, 7,000-8,000 people go to that. They have a big exhibition hall, and all the exhibit producers have their little teasers from their exhibits. So we look at what our museum can handle in terms of square footage. We have about a 6,000 square foot, which is a medium-sized exhibition space. The thing that's tough for us, we would like to bring more blockbusters here, but we're in Gainesville. And so, in Gainesville, a pitcher of beer is supposed to cost $5, and a pizza over $10 isn't going to get purchased. And people just don't want to spend more than about $5 on an exhibit that in New York City they would spend $19 on and not worry about. And in addition, they can put hundreds of thousands of people through that exhibit, and we can probably put tens of thousands through in like a 3-month period. So the answer, I guess, is twofold. We look at exhibits that we think are exciting and that fit with our mission, and then we have to ground truth them in terms of reality. What can we actually afford? And we try to do fundraising. We try to get some corporate sponsorships, and we figure if we get this many people going through at $5, $4, $3, $6, we can offset the cost by that much. So there's an economic, budgetary consideration as well as a content consideration. So it's playing one against the other often. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Hi, I was wondering, what is the museum's role in terms of, in light of recent events, Hurricane Harvey in Texas, Florida being during hurricane season, and things getting more intense? What is the museum's role in educating the community about flash floods and hurricane preparedness?
Yeah, well, we of course have our own emergency plan for our museum, and that's a requirement in the accreditation process, because we have to take care of all those specimens in perpetuity, and it's a big responsibility. So we have redundancies in climate control. We have protocols to follow. But I think your question goes beyond how we take care of in the old museum to the general public and so forth. And we don't really get into the area that, say, FEMA would be involved with, or disaster preparedness organizations at a city or county or state level. But we do think about the effect that hurricanes and floods and stuff have on faunas and floras, and we do have some pretty good data on how the distribution of animals and plants have changed in response to those, and they're kind of interesting. So yeah, it's complicated. I don't know that we have a specific role. Many of our people volunteer, though, to help, and so back in 2004 when Hurricane Charlie came through, we had a lot of people that got boats and got gas cans and flashlights and water, and just headed off to South Florida, Southwest Florida in particular, and were just there to help people because they know how to be out in the natural environment. And that's sort of what it was after that hurricane.
Obviously, the museum has a fantastic relationship with the rest of the University of Florida. What relationship does the museum have with other universities around the state, and for that matter, other museums around the state?
Yeah, that's a good question. As the State Natural History Museum, in the enabling legislation, become the state repository for collections that are accumulated by professors or staff at other state universities. And so we work with most of the people at most of the state universities who might be tagging fish or studying mosquitoes or herbaria and stuff around the state. And so we, a lot of those specimens end up here. That's the good news and that's the bad news, that a lot of the specimens end up here, because if we had them in the beginning, we could have taken care of them the right way, and instead we triage a lot of them from time to time. And some of them, I think just about every SUS institution we deal with, but even institutions like University of Miami, we inherited their marine fish collection, which was a huge collection, but when they wanted to go and build molecular labs, they needed to use all that space, which was occupied by fish. So all the fish came here. Now they want to borrow the fish back so that they can do DNA work on those samples. I'd like to think we could charge them for it. We can't do that. So we work. It's a very collegial community, and let's see. We work with other museums as well. I think that was part of your question too, right? So I'm a past president of the Florida Association of Museums. There are about 450 museums in Florida. Only about 7% of museums are accredited. The Florida Museum of Natural History and our neighbors, the Harn, are both accredited museums. So that means we just abide by the highest professional standards and best practices. I'm also currently the chairperson of the board of the American Alliance of Museums, which is the national organization, professional society of museums, and also runs the accreditation program for museums across the country. One of the other people on our staff, Darcy McMahon, is the chair of the board of the Southeastern Museums Conference, which represents all museums in the Southeast, which is part of that. So I don't say that to blow our own horns. It's just that we have a presence at the national level. And those are the museums that are incorporated there include the Smithsonian, the American Museum of Natural History, the Field Museum, and all the rest. So we're players in that group. We cooperate and we lead. And so we have a vital role at every level. I think there are, if you want to read more about some of the interactions that we have with other universities and so forth, the Explorer magazine, one of the Vice President for Research's office does, features, it was devoted to the Museum of Natural History, and in there are a lot of stories about the research that we do with not only UF but other institutions around the state. And in fact, that was the insert in Florida Trend magazine. Which month was that, Joe? It was like in June, wasn't it? Yeah, I've got a lot of really good PR. What's a museum doing in Florida Trend? I said, well, did you read what our economic output is and how we? Yeah, but I don't believe that. I said, no, it's really true. We are a museum, but we do contribute economically to the state.
Let me wrap it up with one question. What can we do to reach out to children so they can get more engaged in the work that's done at the museum and have a greater understanding of the dilemma facing our Earth, the dilemma that we left them?
Yeah, that's a profound question that we wrestle with. That was part of the reason for creating this discovery zone, to provide an opportunity for parents, caregivers to work with their little kids, children, in scaffolded learning that involves the parents and the children in teaching them some fundamental principles about how you learn and curiosity and what matters and how things in the natural world work. So that's good, but it's only a a small start. You know, if we had 20,000 people, I think I told you in the first couple of weeks, and so if we have 100,000 that come through there in a year, that would be terrific, but that's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the audience that we need to reach. And so I see our future as using the internet and creating, well, like that video that I showed you, and digitized specimens and creating curriculum that will be so intriguing and pushing it into the public schools so that the teachers can use it right away without, you know, having to massage it or learn a lot, and turning kids on that way so that they could see specimens, and then with a 3D printer maybe in their classroom they could actually print out a piece of it, and they could you know, be inspired to learn more about the environment around them. We also, you know, we have summer camps for kids. Every time the public schools are out of session, we have classes for children, K to 12 kids at the museum. But once again, we're located in Gainesville. We have to figure out how to ramp that up. And the only way I can see we can do that and reach the kind of audiences that we will is through digitized and electronic media. And that's where we're headed.
Doug, I want to ask you
Today.
one little follow-up on that because I think it's relevant. The kind of stuff that people like Bruce McFadden are doing where they're working with teachers, I think is also another way to exponentially increase maybe you just mentioned that real quick.
Yeah, no, we have successfully competed for a number of these big federal grants, research experiences for teachers that involve teachers in the scientific enterprise. And so we bring them on to, Joe and his crew came down to Panama one time with a slew of teachers from Florida, from California, from Texas, and they learned they got excited about what we were doing in the field. They would come back and make their own curriculum modules based upon those specimens, and they would use the specimens they collected in class. And their excitement was so infectious that the kids got excited. And you know, I tell people all the time, you know, that's what museums do. We don't fill in all the blanks. School can fill in a lot of the information, but you know, I never heard somebody say, oh, I got so excited, I became a scientist because of my 6th grade general science textbook. It was the most stimulating book I ever read. I've just never heard that, you know? But I've heard a lot of people say, man, I went to the museum and I saw this collection. I'm just blown away by how many different kinds of butterflies. Or I went to the desert botanical garden and the cactus, and now I'm a cactus expert because it was just so fascinating. Or I went with your crew to the Everglades and saw how you tagged alligators and studied them, and I knew then that was, you know, I mean, those are the kinds of experiences that change lives and push us forward.
He's been director since 1994. He's never slowed down. He's never eased up on his ambition for the museum. Please join me in thanking Doug Jones.